A lot of people are used to using all kinds of no-code tools for building their apps. But did you know that you can actually use Google Sheets as the UI for your app? And this app can be very, very simple, or it could be fairly complex. Yes, it is absolutely possible. And yes, you can easily do it with no code. And so in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how you can build any kind of app with Google Sheets, whether it's a simple app or a more complex app. And I'm going to be showing you a very, very useful app example, so to get your juices flowing. Now, before we get started, as always, all the apps and all the resources that I demonstrate on this channel are going to be available to clone via my Patreon page. And you can learn more about our amazing Patreon community using the link in the description below this video. Now, before I show you how you can build just about any kind of app with Google Sheets, let me show you the app that I built. Now, the idea for this app is very simple. You're going to give it a URL of a PDF file, and then you'll be able to ask the app various questions having to do with that PDF file. So here I am in Google Sheets, and I have a simple sheet right here with two columns. I just have a PDF and a status column that we can display various status information. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste a URL of a PDF file that I prepared for this video tutorial. So here's the URL, and I'm going to press enter. And now I'm going to wait some moments for the app to pick this up and start processing it. Now, this PDF file is actually a PDF export of Wikipedia page on Roman Empire. So it's everything and anything you ever wanted to know about the Roman Empire, but you were afraid to ask, and will be able to ask it various things about the Roman Empire once the PDF is scanned by my app. Now, once we go back to Google Sheets, there's a new status here. It's called processing. And what this means is that the app has picked up this PDF here, and it is now processing it. So that means you can essentially Q&A it now. And in order to Q&A this PDF, you can simply go to this other sheet that I have here called queries. And in this sheet, we just have two columns. So we have a question column and we have an answer column. So in the question column, you can ask it various questions, and you will be able to see the answers in the answer column. Okay, so let's say I ask it, what is the Roman Empire? Okay, so let's say I do that. Now I need to wait a few moments, and I should see an answer right here. All right, so that was a few seconds, and now we got an answer right here. And so if I wrap this column so that it's easier to read, you can see the Roman Empire was the post-republican state of ancient Rome. It included territory around the Mediterranean in Europe, North Africa, and Western Asia, and was ruled by emperors. Okay, so now I can ask it another question about this PDF. Let's say I want to know why did the Roman Empire fail? Why did the Roman Empire collapse? Okay, so I press enter. Now I need to wait a few moments for the app to pick up my question, and we should see an answer right here. Okay, and so now we just got an answer. Let me go ahead and wrap this so that you can see it easily. It says here, the imperial seat moved, involving large invasions by the Germanic peoples and by the Huns of Attila, led to the decline of the Western Roman Empire with the fall of etc. etc. The Western Roman Empire finally collapsed. Okay, and so there you see an answer. And obviously you can keep going, and you can ask it all kinds of questions having to do with this PDF. All right, so now that you've seen how this app works, let me show you how you can build such an app. And stay tuned until the end of the video, where I'm going to talk about some of the advantages and some of the things that you can do with this app that you might not have realized while you were looking at it. Okay, So the first thing that we need to do is we need to find a PDF. This could be any kind of PDF. And additionally, it's also relatively easy to change this app to read just about any kind of data. So it doesn't really need to be PDFs in the future if you want to modify it. But right now it works with PDFs. And so what I did is I went on to Wikipedia and I just picked a neutral topic such as Roman Empire and I exported it as a PDF. And then I upload it so that it's online, so that it's accessible via a URL, okay? The next thing that we need to do is we need to build a workflow that essentially does all the processing in the backend. And for that, I use the tool that's quickly becoming one of my favorite automation tools, and that tool is called N8N. And this tool is actually open source. You can get the source code and you can also host it for absolutely free. And I actually have a very, very comprehensive video tutorial on how you can host this tool for absolutely free. And you can watch that tutorial right there. It's a very, very popular video. And so I have this tool hosted on one of my machines in the cloud right now, and you'll be able to easily do the same after you watch that video. But what you can essentially do with this tool is you can build all kinds of workflows that do just about anything. And so you can build a workflow that you can execute manually, but you can also build a workflow that grabs some information, some data from elsewhere, such as the case with this app, because we're grabbing information, essentially questions or queries from Google Sheets, okay? So I created a workflow, but I didn't create just one workflow. I actually created two workflows here. And before I explain to you how this workflow here works, just a quick reminder that for all my amazing Patreon subscribers, I'm going to be giving you both of these workflows. And so what I will do is I will come here and I will download it, and then you can easily import it into your own instance of N8N. And this is a very, very interesting workflow, okay? So let's begin with the PDF processing workflow, and then we'll talk about the actual question and answer, the querying part, okay? So the first thing that we need to do is we have something called the Google Sheets trigger, right? So if I come over here, I have this trigger that I configured for my Google Sheets, and you can easily find this trigger by pressing this add a note button and typing Sheets. Okay, and so if you click on Sheets, you scroll down, you have three triggers. Okay, and what is a trigger? Well, a trigger is something that starts your workflow. It's the first node in any workflow. It's the first module. So this thing is a trigger right here. And as you can see, this is a trigger node, right? And this is the first node right here. And you can't really have any workflows without a trigger node. Something needs to start it, right? Something needs to say, okay, now start working, right? Otherwise, it's not going to work. And you have all kinds of interesting triggers when it comes to N8N. So if you come over here, I can add another trigger. And so these are the various triggers that I can set up. It could be a webhook call, a schedule. It could be a specific trigger with the app like I have here, which is a Google Sheets trigger. I can have a manual trigger, all kinds of interesting triggers. And so this specific trigger, what it's doing is it's listening on that Google Sheets, and it's listening if there's any row that has been added or updated. So not only can you add new PDFs as well if you wanted to, but you can also modify existing rows, and it's going to pick up on that. And I have it set to check the status, check the spreadsheet every minute, okay? And you can obviously change it, every month, every hour, every day. And it's very, very fast. So I have it set to every minute, and it seems like it's almost instant, okay? I only need to wait a couple of seconds, really. And so it's very, very quick in that regard, okay? Now, the next thing that I'm doing is I'm updating that row. Remember, we added the row, and this workflow picked up on that row. So now we have that row that we added. So it knows about that row. And so the next thing that I do, and this is like an optional step, but it's a nice to have, is I am setting a status called processing. So I essentially pull up that row and add a status called processing here, okay? The next thing that I'm doing is I'm doing an HTTP request. where I'm grabbing this PDF here. So I need to download this PDF. And then what I'm doing is I'm reading this PDF. Okay, so when I download the PDF, that's not a text file. Okay, it's a binary file. That's what PDFs are. It's a special format. It's a proprietary format that's not meant, for people to read. You need an app, you need a PDF reader. And this is why we have this nice node here, or a module, right? In N8N terminology, they're called nodes. With other tools such as make.com, another very, very similar tool, they're called modules. So it's the same thing, really. And so we have this read PDF node here, and that is simply reading this data. And you see, if I execute this right now here, you'll be able to see the PDF that it has. And so as you can see, the input was that PDF file, this Roman Empire PDF, and the output is a little bit different. So if I click on this JSON format, you see it now has read that PDF and it extracted all the information out of it, right? So we see that it has 3 pages, that it's 3 rendered pages, a bunch of other information here, and then the text. And this is exactly what we need, okay? Because here is just, it's just a binary file. That is why we need to use that module. And that's another nice thing about this N8N tool, is that you can see the things that are coming in, the input right here, and you can see an output right here, okay? Now, the next thing that I do is I take this text here that you saw right here. So if I come over here, you see all this text. And what I do is I split it up. I split it by sentences, and that is what this next module is doing here, called the text array, and that's splitting it up by sentences here. And so if I click on this module, you can see that I'm using something called a split function, and I'm splitting it by this period. Now in this example right here, I'm only grabbing the first 50 sentences or so, and the purpose of that is this is a proof of concept, okay? If it's gonna work with the first 50 sentences, everything is gonna work, and I just want to make sure that it's fast and I can demonstrate it easily. But in production, obviously, you're not going to be having this statement here. You're going to remove this completely, and that way you can grab all the sentences. Now, the next thing that we need to do after we have a list of sentences is we need to generate chunks, okay? And what is a chunk? Well, a chunk is basically a collection of words, in this case, when it comes to text. And one way to think about it is a sentence itself is a chunk. The problem with treating each sentence as a chunk is that it's relatively short. And when we start working with those chunks, just by having sentences, it's not going to give us the information that we need. They're just too short. A sentence is too short of a chunk. And so I have here some code. And the first thing that we're doing is we're creating an empty chunk right here. So as you can see, chunk empty. And then what I'm doing is I'm continuously adding more and more sentences to each chunk until that chunk is more than a certain amount of characters. Now, if you take a look at this module here called chunk ready, you can see that my parameter for the number of characters that I want to be in the chunk, essentially the number of characters that a chunk needs to be at least, is 256 characters. Okay, so as I'm adding these sentences, I'm checking, is that chunk larger or equal to 256 characters? If it's smaller, I'm going to keep adding more sentences. And then eventually it's going to be bigger than 256 characters. I'm going to show you exactly when we run this live, and you will see exactly how it works. Now, I also have a check here just to make sure that we still have sentences to add to the chunk, because if we do not have any more sentences, then I cannot create that chunk to be big enough. And this is why I have this other check here. So if I notice that, I can't make this last chunk big enough, but I also don't have any sentences to work with, then that's fine too. That last chunk could be smaller, and typically it's going to be smaller because you're going to run out of sentences at the end, right? You're going to run out of sentences for that last chunk. So while the previous chunk is going to be sufficient, that last chunk is, chances are it's going to be smaller than 256 characters here. And so here I have a very simple loop that essentially appends more and more sentences to this chunk that I defined here and keeps checking. Now, if that chunk is less than 256 characters and we still have a lot of, text to process, then I'm going to go back and append the next sentence to it. But if that chunk is more than 256 characters, or if I don't have any more, sentences to work with, in that case, I essentially have a chunk that's ready to go. And the next thing I need to do is I need to get embeddings for this chunk. Now, what exactly are embeddings? Well, I talked about embeddings in some of the other videos on this channel, but this is a really, really good video that you should check out if you want to learn more about embeddings. But essentially, embeddings are a way to convert text into its numerical format. So actually, OpenAI has their own embeddings API, and OpenAI is the company behind GPT and ChatGPT. So they have their own way of generating embeddings, which is exactly what I'm using here. And so in this node right here, I'm sending a request to OpenAI, and my request looks something like this. I'm sending in the name of the model, and I'm sending in the input text that I want to be converted into embeddings. And for instance, if I send this text right here, I'm going to be getting an embeddings that looks something like this. And so for instance, if I send this text here, I'm going to get embeddings, which are essentially 1,536 numbers, which is an array of numbers that contains 1,536 items in that array. And this is what the embeddings for this text look like. These are the embeddings right here. Now, by themselves, embeddings do not really mean anything, okay? They don't really mean anything to anybody by themselves. Now, where embeddings come in really, really handy is when it comes to comparing different pieces of text for their semantic meaning. Okay, so not only whether this word has the same letters as the other word, but we are talking about the actual meaning of different sentences. Once you encode different pieces of text into their embeddings format, you can easily compare those embeddings and you can actually see if there's some similarity. And this could be super useful in applications such as a search engine or a Q&A or a chatbot, etc., etc. Basically, any kind of situation where you have one piece of text that you want to compare with many other pieces of text and figure out which is the closest that you have in your vector or embedding database. Now, once we get an embedding for a particular chunk, the next thing that we need to do is we need to store that embedding somewhere. We need to store it because later on we need to query against those embeddings that we have stored. That is why we're saving it, and that is why we are doing all this, because later on we will need to query for a specific term that the user might be interested in or that the user is searching for. Now, when it comes to storing embeddings, you have tons of different options, and I'm actually using a product called Pinecone, which claims to be long-term memory for AI. And what Pinecone provides is an embeddings database or a vector database, because embeddings are really just vectors. And this allows you to store embeddings, but it also allows you to query, to compare, to see some of the similarities. There's lots of things that you can do, and they also give you an API, which means you can do it for pretty much anywhere, from any kind of app or any kind of integration tool, or even manually if you want. And so if I log into Pinecone, as you can see, I have here one index here, and if I click here, you can see that I have 12 vectors here, essentially 12 embeddings for 12 chunks that I have in this system. And along with storing embeddings, which you're going to be doing by using Upsert, you can also query them, you can update them, you can fetch, or you can delete those embeddings as well. Now, after we get the embedding for one of the chunks and we save that embedding into our Pinecone DB, we're not done yet. We still need to see whether there are more sentences that we need to convert into chunks. And so what I'm doing here is when I get a chunk, I essentially remove all the sentences that I converted into a chunk with. So let's say I had 50 sentences and the first 5 sentences became a chunk. Well, now I have 45 sentences because I removed the first 5 sentences. And this is what I'm doing here. I'm creating that text, which is an array of sentences. But this time what I'm doing is I'm removing that first X number of sentences that I parsed and created an embedding out of it. And that way, that list of sentences keeps decreasing. It keeps gradually becoming smaller and smaller because I'm converting those sentences into embeddings. And that is why we need to keep checking. Do we have more sentences that we need to convert into embeddings? And that is the goal of this module here. This module checks whether the text, meaning that corpus of text, those sentences that we need to convert into embeddings, is still greater than 0. Because if it's smaller or equal to 0, this thing becomes true, right? This condition becomes true, and then it doesn't do anything. But if it's not, smaller or greater than 0, it should never be smaller, but I'm just checking for it anyway. But if it's greater than 0, meaning there is some text to be processed, then it's false, and then it repeats again. And so it keeps building those chunks until it exhausts that original corpus of text that we parsed and we gotten in this HTTP request, and then we parsed with this PDF module here. Now, right now, let me go ahead and execute this workflow so you can see it in real time exactly how the whole thing works. Okay, so it triggered. It's doing the HTTP request right here, as you can see. Now it's reading that PDF file, and now it's processing the chunks and storing the embeddings. And as you can see, it says workflow executed successfully. And so on each node, you can see a number, and that is how many times that particular node executed. Okay, so if there is no number, it just executed once. But here, and so as you can see here, it's 10. That means we've created 10 chunks here, okay? And here we're processing all the sentences. There's lots of sentences, lots of text to process, but at the end of the day, we have 10 chunks, 10 embeddings. We store 10 embeddings, and as you can see, we have 10 chunks here. And so if you click on this one, for instance, right here, you can see all the runs. You can see all the chunks. So this is the first chunk here, and as you can see, it's false because there's still more text to process. And if you click on this false, you can see that there's all this text that we need to process, but we do have a chunk right here. And so if I click on the second one, you can see that we have another chunk, and we have all this text that we still need to process. And then if you click on the third one, we have another chunk, and then we have more text. And so if I click on number 7, this is our 7th chunk. And let's say number 8, I have another chunk. So if I click on number 8, you can see I have a chunk, and I have all this text that needs to be converted into a chunk. And then finally, number 10 is true, because we don't have any more text left and we can't build a chunk of that. And as a result, we have 10 chunks. We created 10 embeddings. So if you click here, you can see that these are the 10 embeddings that we created, right? So this is embedding number 1, embedding number 2. You see they're all different. You can actually see the chunk that was passed into this node here, and you can see the embedding that was created here, okay? And then we're storing the embeddings as well. And so this whole workflow here, essentially it's parsing the PDF, creating chunks out of it, and storing those chunks in a vector database as embeddings. Now I want to show you a separate workflow that I created specifically for Q&A. And so if you click on workflows here, you can see that we have this Google Sheets query workflow. And so this is a much simpler workflow. And essentially what happens here is we have a trigger, and this happens when a user enters a row in the Q&A part. So essentially when the user asks a question, we have a trigger that triggers this entire workflow. And so when the user adds a row with their question, it triggers this, and then we have embeddings. So we need to get the embeddings for the question. That way we can compare and try to get the right answer to the user. So if we double click here, you can see that I'm sending in the question in order to get the embeddings. I'm sending it to OpenAI. Now, once I get the embedding, right, once I get that whole list of those random numbers, now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be executing a query here to Pinecone, right? I'm using this query here, and I'm sending those embeddings into the query. I'm also specifying that I want to get 5 results. You can specify if you just want the first one, or the top 3 results, or the top 5. This is absolutely configurable. And once I get a response, I can set it as a value. And this is what I'm doing. So I'm setting that first top response, that first top match as a value here. And then last but not least, I'm updating the sheet using this node. And what I'm doing here is I'm pulling up the rows, and I'm finding that row with the question that was asked in the initial node, and I'm finding that answer cell, and I'm updating that answer cell right here. And so if I go back to my app here, I can ask it another question. So if we go to this PDF here, and maybe I want to ask something about the imperial seat. Okay, so I can go back here and I can say, where did the imperial seat move to? And now we're going to wait a couple of moments for the answer to pop up here. Okay, so now our workflow is running right now. So it picked up our change. And now if you go back to our Google Sheet, you can see that we have an answer. So if I format it right here to wrap, and so as you can see, it says here, the imperial seat moved from this place in 330. And so if we go back to our tool, you can see all the executions that are triggered automatically just based in the changes in Google Sheets. So you can see it over here. You can also see it in the other workflow as well. So here's the main workflow here. And if you click on executions, and so as you can see, we have some workflows that were triggered here as well. And you can also see how many times each node executed for right here by this little number in the bottom right corner. And so you can see 10, that means essentially 10 chunks that we first got embeddings for, and then we stored embeddings for them as well. And so a pretty cool app by using something simple as Google Sheets as the UI. And so obviously you can take it a lot further. You can do pretty much anything that you want to do, right? You can use Google Sheets as your UI, and you can keep it as simple or as complex as you want. Now, one of the coolest things about this app is that you can easily share it with just about anyone. And once you share it, they can start to use this app. So they can, have a Q&A session. They can add, different sources here. And speaking of different sources, it's very, very simple to modify this app to work with just about anything, okay? So right now we're working with PDFs. And if you go back into our workflows, right? If you go to this workflow right here, you can easily change with what kind of data you're dealing with. So we have a read PDF module here, or read PDF node. If you are working with a web page, you're gonna have like a scraper node that's gonna, you're gonna give it a URL and it's gonna just get the data. Or if you're working with a regular, piece of text out on the internet, you have the URL, then you're not going to be working with this node, because you can just do a GET request on that piece of text and start working with it from there. So adapting this workflow for any kind of data source is very, very, very simple. And remember, if you're a member of our amazing Patreon community, you're going to have access to all of these workflows. And so you can easily import it right into your own N8N instance. And so once you import it, you can tweak it, you can change it, you can do just about anything. And plus, when you join our amazing Patreon community, you're going to get access to pretty much all the apps that I built on this channel, all the Flutterflow apps, as well as all the other no-code apps. And that means you can view and or clone them. And so you can easily get access to all my other apps, get access to this workflow, combine the two, and you have a pretty cool, innovative app. And so if you're looking to advance your no-code knowledge, maybe you want to open a business and sell all kinds of apps, or you're just doing this for fun as a hobby, check out our amazing Patreon community in the link below this video and consider becoming a member. Now, if you haven't yet watched my comprehensive tutorial when it comes to N8N, you will see that video right there. So definitely check it out.